So hi everyone, we have a company introduction webinar, and it's a new company that participates in X-Culture for the first time. So a very first meeting. And so please correct me. So in my records, the company shows up as Parent, just the name, but there is a longer name to the company, right?
Yes, we're in a very interesting stage. So we're just going through rebranding. So originally the company was Parent Carey Limited. But we're just rebranding as CoSteer Limited. So we're in a very exciting stage. So yes, so CoSteer is probably what we would prefer to be called now.
Good to know. Good to know. And so I assume then you are Parent Carey. You are the founder of the company, right? So and Divya is one of the employees and the company representatives, correct?
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
All right, well, so we would like to learn more about the company and more about the challenge and the list of tasks and questions that you would like our students to work on. And so I suggest we start with a very short introduction of the company and services. And then we have a bunch of questions already. There will be probably more. So students watching now, most of the students, I assume, are in classes at work at this time, or maybe in Asia already asleep. So they will be watching the recording. But those of you who are here with us live, feel free to ask questions anytime. You can put them in the Q&A window, or you can raise your hand and we will add you to the panel here so you can talk to our presenters. And yes, I guess now we would like to hear a little bit more about the company in a way of a general overview.
Okay, thanks, Baz. Welcome everybody and all of you who are here, and to those that come along and view this later. We consider all organizations to simply be a bunch of human beings. And I think what we're trying to do, and we've created an innovative piece of proprietary technology to do this, is measure how well organizations operate and work together as humans. And we draw the metaphor between humans in organizations and the murmuration of starlings. So the beautiful flocking of starlings on the horizon in evenings around the world. And what we say to boards and leadership teams is, wouldn't it be lovely if your organization flew like a flock of murmurating starlings? And our piece of technology and the methodology that we use in our innovative business is designed to measure how well an organization and the humans in that organization are murmurating. So we're on a pretty upward trajectory at the moment. We've created our technology. We've beta tested that technology. We're now in version 2 of that tech on the basis of the beta testing we've done. And we're just about to receive our first round of seed investment funding, hopefully to the tune of about £500,000, Great Britain pounds. And we're really excited to be part of this project and to be invited by Baz to come along and be involved. So thank you.
So what exactly is then the service or the product that you offer, and who are your customers who buy it?
I would say, who are our customers, first of all? Any business, any industry, any size, anywhere in the world. So that sounds pretty grand, but ultimately, what we're trying to measure is how well businesses operate as groups of human beings. And we think every business in the world is interested in that. And then in terms of where we are and what we're selling, so we measure that. So we have the methodology and the technology that's capable of measuring and providing real-time data of how well an organization is murmurating, how well they're operating as human beings.
So essentially, this is the software, I assume. So it's more of an IT solution, or is it more than just the IT?
No, it's fundamentally, it's actually a scientific methodology that allows us to collect data from the human beings within that organization through surveys. We use the answers to those surveys to understand where each human being is within their organization. And we can plot where those humans are on some very interesting charts, graphs, and data.
This is very interesting. So that's actually quite close to what many of the professors on the X-Culture team do. So most of us major in organizational theory, HR, organizational dynamics. And so obviously that's related. So when you say surveys, are you talking more about sort of surveying the employees' skills, or is it more about what they do, or is it more about the feelings, or is it more about things like emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, or is it interactions among the people? What kind of data do you collect?
Okay, so we measure what probably most organizations would call organizational governance. So basically, how well is an organization governing itself? We break that down into three specific elements: culture, so organizational culture, the quality of the decision making that's made within that organization, and then the quality of the implementation of those decisions. Mm-hmm. So what's your purpose and culture? So what's the direction you want to head in? Make some decisions, put those decisions into action. I think it would be difficult to say that every business in the world isn't trying to do that as best they can.
Yeah, actually, when you said all companies on the planet, I was a little skeptical, but yes, if you're talking about things like culture, decision-making, implementation, yes, it is applicable to any company of any size. So that makes perfect sense. So when you measure and produce the report, does it include some sort of guidelines on how to do it better, or what's the sort of the purpose of the measurement?
Yeah, so when we get the data back, we essentially report on 36 indicators of these metrics within an organization related to those three domains: culture, decision-making, and decision implementation. What we also measure using our murmuration algorithms is we measure cohesion, collaboration, and agility. So if you think about the murmuration of starlings in the sky when they're sort of moving in that, you're seeing cohesion, you're seeing collaboration, but you're also seeing a huge amount of agility. And so when we talk to boards, we say, well, wouldn't it be lovely if your entire organization was able to do that? So we actually quantify that and can benchmark that against our data universe, and basically say, this is how well you are performing in comparison to, you know, this company in your jurisdiction, this industry, et cetera, et cetera. So what we then go on to do, and you asked Baz about, do we give guidance as to what next? Absolutely. So what we've been able to do with the data set so far, we've got 16,000 data points, is we've been able to understand how each of the 36 elements that we measure are interconnected. So for example, how is the purpose in your organization interconnected with the quality of the decision-making that's happening? How are the values and behaviors that are being exhibited in your organization connected to the implementation of those decisions? And what we've been able to do with the data so far is we now understand how each of these 36 elements are interconnected. We don't just understand how they're interconnected, we also understand the ratio, the factor that exists between each of these elements. So what we can do when we measure an organization now, we can actually, one, compare it against our data universe and give benchmarking, but we can also say, and these are your weaknesses, these are your strengths, and these are your priorities. Because we understand the interrelationship and the factor between these relationships, we also can say, well, you might have a strength that's also a priority. Because actually it's so influential within your organization. Whilst you're scoring high, we know that if you uplift that by 3 or 4 or 5%, then actually it has far more uplift on your overall murmuration than if you were to uplift one of your lower scoring items. So we think we have a very, very strong product, a very, very solid scientific methodology, which has been independently assessed and considered fit for purpose by a independent organization in terms of, I guess they're actuarial by nature, but they're very focused on looking at surveys and the essentially the statistical correlations within surveys. So we're very, very confident with the product that we have. We're very confident with the methodology. We're now about to launch into markets around the world.
Mm-hmm. This is very interesting. That's actually not that different or much of what we do in terms of research at Culture is very closely aligned or even overlapping to some extent with what you're describing. So as you know, we have about 1,000 teams each semester. And so for us, each team works independently. And so the big question is why some teams do better than others. And so organizational climate, cohesion, decision-making, all of those play a role. I'm kind of curious now, so do you think your methodology could be maybe applied to our teams to see if we can figure out why some teams do better than others, or what prevents some teams from succeeding, and maybe providing some sort of a training? So
in a very straight answer, yes. In terms of the way that we've run our data, we've looked at organizations of different sizes. We've run it actually with organizations as low as 5 people, 5 human beings. Mm-hmm. And because of the data universe that we have, we're able to be very confident with the outcomes that we've got. And there's very high levels of what statisticians call predictability within the survey design. And so as a consequence, we can actually use very low numbers when it comes to people within an organization. So absolutely, this could be applied to your teams of 5, 6 around the world. We could measure all of those teams and we could give you a fantastic picture of which teams we would predict would do better than others. Maybe even kind of midway through, we could measure, teams midway through, and we could actually begin to see if we could predict which ones might perform the best as a consequence of the governance that exists within those teams. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you said predict, because my next question kind of dealt with sort of, so what? So what is the value, consequence, utility, or prediction? So you already mentioned that the assessment might be used to predict how the company will do, and if it detects a problem, I assume early interventions can help prevent that problem. But also, I'm not sure if you've done any utility analysis. I mean, so companies that have gone through your assessment and perhaps the follow-up training or interventions, are there any data on the improvements in performance or decision-making or implementation speed or efficiency, or some other metrics that would be considered sort of, bottom line performance indicators?
Yeah, absolutely. So we collect up to 10 indices on company performance, looking at everything from financial performance to more sort of human metrics like staff turnover. And we use those in order to look at whether or not we're seeing improvements. Now, you'll often see a lag in those improvements. So you might see an improvement in organizational culture, but you may not see an effect on organizational performance for maybe another 6 to 12 months following those improvements, mainly because financial metrics are always backward anyway. You're always looking behind in terms of actual organizational performance. The other thing that we're building, which is part of the technology, is what we call our performance predictor. Mm-hmm. So we know from organizational governance research that there is a clear connection between the quality of governance within an organization and its overall performance. Now, whether you're measuring EBITDA, whether you're measuring staff turnover, whether you're measuring staff satisfaction, there are clear connections between them. Now, what we've been able to do is essentially do some very clever regression analysis on ESG, so environmental, social and governance scores of UK listed AIM and PLC FTSE 350 companies. And we've been able to understand the relationship between their governance scores and organizational performance. Now, what we've then been able to do is to take write our own algorithms to look at the data that we collect And we can then, essentially looking at the priorities that emerge from our data, we can then say to an organization, okay, click on our performance predictor, uplift purpose by 3%, uplift the quality of data within your organization by 5%, uplift what we call reasoned persistence by 2%. And we can predict that actually within a sort of medium term, so sort of 12 to 18 months, that you will actually see an uplift in these performance metrics by so much. So we believe that this is incredibly powerful and not just a kind of nice to have, but I think in the current climate within organizations, I think we see it as probably a must have. So yeah.
There is a question from Anderson Capello here. What is the cost for rebranding? So the original name of the company was Parent Carry, right? And now is it CoSteer, you said? Is that the name?
That's right. CoSteer Limited is the company, yeah, but CoSteer is the brand, yeah.
And so what is the reason for the change? Just to make it more broadly appealing, or some other reasons?
Yeah, I think one, to make it more broadly appealing. Secondly, when we started out, we saw ourselves initially as a kind of research company, but we actually realized that we've created something that's potentially incredibly commercial. And therefore we realized we needed to turn this into something that was far more of a front-facing, understandable brand. CoSteer, obviously, as you can imagine, comes from governance, which means to steer. Co, as in we steer with you, co-piloting, right. Co-steering. And the other, obviously, analogy is co-steering itself, which is obviously navigating very difficult terrains around the edge of coastlands. So we've kind of drawn some analogies and metaphors in the name that we found, but yes, it's principally about taking a scientifically designed research project and now turning it into a commercial front-facing product.
So I couldn't help but notice, so here on the title page of your challenge, so you have the CoSteer, and then you also have powered by Vindia or Vidya. So yeah. What is the difference? So CoSteer is the name of the company now, right?
CoSteer is the name of the company. Govindisia, basically, yeah, governance indicators is essentially where that comes from. That's our technology. So that's our proprietary technology. And
that's the IT solution kind of behind that product?
Yes, absolutely. That's our IP, basically. That's the intellectual property that sits behind the business. That allows us to be able to do all the things I've spoken about. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. Now, there is also another question from Kushi Parvani here, more about the technology itself. So you make these predictions based on self-report surveys of the employees, or there is more kinds of data going into it? And I'm not sure if the implication is some sort of performance data or some sort of organizational chart data, or is it purely how employees feel and how they report, how they collaborate and make decisions?
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so initially the research design was through a singular 36 statement survey. In that survey, we ask, obviously, statements linked and connected to the 3 domains that we spoke about. So culture, decision-making, and decision implementation. We ask a statement, so we might say the purpose in our organization is clear and well articulated. There's a statement. You agree or strongly disagree. And then we ask a follow-up question for every single statement. And that is, how confident are you in your answer? Now, what we know from behavioral science research is that if you do that with a human being, instantly 2 things happen. Firstly, the human being will reflect upon the original score. So actually you get an uplift in the quality of the original answer. And secondly, human beings love to be right. It's important to us that we're right. It's a part of our survival mechanism. Being wrong is not good. So as a consequence, by allowing human beings the chance to essentially say how confident they are, the need to be right dissolves. And again, what you get is an increase and an uplift in the quality of the original answers to your statements. But also what that interestingly does is it allows us to plot each human on the basis of score and confidence, which is where we begin to get our 2-dimensional murmuration scores for. So that's where the data primarily comes from. We're in the process of devising other ways of sort of collecting these data. We're really interested in how to collect qualitative data from an organization. So we're working with an organization that has a piece of semantic software that allows us to collect narrative in the survey designs that we have, and then build that narrative into being able to quantify, levels of words and phrases and meanings of those as well through an AI solution. But at the moment, yeah, we're principally through 2 or 3 surveys that we have, and measuring both the score and confidence level directly to all employees within an organization. Yeah.
Analyzing the text data, if you can crack that. So for Xculture, that's been a sort of challenge for us. We collect also immense amounts of data. So it's over 2,500 variables that we track. And then, a chunk of data comes in the form of weekly progress comments. So people just talk in their own words what's going on in their teams every week. And so I think that's the richest data, but it's also the one that is, that part is hard to work with. When you have about 6,000 people, each one leaves a couple of paragraphs of text. All of a sudden, you have hundreds of thousands of pages, of text by the end of the competition that we simply don't have the resources to analyze. So some sort of an AI or text analysis, software would have probably been very helpful here. And that's something we haven't quite figured out. Yeah. I'm looking here at again, the challenge instructions. And so I see all kinds of, so I assume that's what the report looks like. So these are the examples of the actual output that the clients get. Is that, I see a lot of fancy data, but also seems like you're getting quite technical when you analyze the organizational culture, decision making, and what else is measured here, right?
So. Absolutely, yeah. So these are essentially outputs from the technology itself. So organizations have access not just to the report, but also to the actual data through this portal. So they can splice and dice. They can look at views from the board. They look at views from different jurisdictions. They can look at views from different sections or functions within their organization, different demographics like gender and age. So there's a whole way of kind of viewing the organization's data to be able to understand, okay, so where exactly within our organization do we need to focus our efforts in order to maximize the return on any investment that we might spend? Because if you go into a board nowadays and you ask them, well, what's going to be your business improvement plan over the next 12 months? A lot of the time it's, well, last year we did some good leadership training, so we might do that again. We might extend that down to senior leaders and middle management. And I'm going, why? And they go, oh, well, it was quite good. We enjoyed it. And I'm going, you're telling me that's the decision that you're making? So what we're trying to do is essentially bring a slightly more strategic and intelligent way of deciding where are we going to spend our 100,000 this year. Are we going to spend it on leadership training, or do we actually need to spend it on the quality of data that exists within our organization?
That's a very good point. And yes, it's a very common tale. So yes, we will do it because people seem to have enjoyed it last time. So, but yes. Competition. So who would be your competitors? How would you position yourself in that competitive landscape of organizational data analytics and consulting?
You know what? I think it's really fascinating. We have explored who we think our competitors might be. And I think, without wanting to sound too kind of glib, I don't think we see any particular competitors at this current time. Because we're approaching the measurement of governance from the perspective of both performance as being an outcome, but also the quality of compliance being an outcome. So of course, in this current global sort of situation in which we live with corporate failures all over the world, what we see is that regulators are trying to tighten up on corporate governance codes. Now, what organizations are doing to respond to that is they're essentially bringing in swathes of, management consultants, come in, spend 3 weeks, 6 months with us, review our corporate governance, write us a 50-page report, we'll pay you £200,000, and it'll be put in the drawer and presented to the regulator when they turn up.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not driving performance. It might be ticking a box of compliance, but it's certainly not providing sustainability for the business.
Yeah.
So I don't actually think we have competitors per se. And I think what we see ourselves as is a significant disruptor in the marketplace. Now, one thing that we've got out, I think, for you guys to have a look at is essentially markets to enter. And then, of course, connected with that, what might be our pricing strategy in these markets. We see ourselves, as I say, as a disruptor. So if you think that if you're a 500-person organization, turning over, somewhere between 10 to 50 million a year, and you're going to pay upwards of £250,000 for an auditor to come in and review your governance. Well, we can deliver this, give you what we believe is far more intuitive and informative data for probably a tenth of that price. Yeah. So we see ourselves as a significant disruptor to the essential traditional measurement of governance, which is done through auditor. So it's done through, we're going to throw 20 people at you, they're going to be £1,000 a day. It's going to cost you £250,000, and you'll get a 50-page report, and then you decide what to do next. We don't want to be like that. We don't think that's the way forward. So we see ourselves as a disruptor in the marketplace. We don't see ourselves as having any competitors right now, but we also understand that the biggest risk to us is essentially someone going, that's a really good idea. We've got 3 million to invest. Let's create what CoSteer have done. And we've got a lot of client connections. So I think the biggest risk to us at the moment is being overtaken by someone who suddenly realizes that what we're doing is actually quite clever. So, yeah.
So a few more quick questions just to make sure that the students have a full picture. So how old is the company at this time? And then there was also another question from another student. So you probably did something like that before you started your own business. So the question also was, why did you decide to start your own business? So when did you transition to this enterprise? How long ago? But also what prompted you to be on this path? Yeah,
okay. Let's start with how the company is essentially about 18 months old. Now, we're obviously going through a transition. So CoSteer is in its infancy. Parent Carey Limited, barely got out of nappies and diapers, but we do feel like we're in a very strong position, and we're just about to, as I say, receive the first round of really significant funding for us. You're right. I haven't been doing this all of my life. I have spent large proportions of my life working in both education, but actually also in the field of governance. So I've been on the C-suite of UK PLCs, being chief risk and chief compliance officers, and also in Australia. So my background is both obviously working in this area within the corporate arena, but also spending many years in education and research, which is obviously the background, I guess, of why I've approached this from a very much of a scientific and data perspective. Yeah.
So you are more on the corporate governance side, not so much on IT. For some reason, I thought that you maybe came from the IT world, but it seems like you know the topics. So okay, that's good to know. So your current client base, are they primarily in the UK, or you mentioned Australia? So is it already international, or is it mainly domestic customers?
I would say we're primarily UK at the moment, and with that, it's primarily in our domestic jurisdiction here, which is in Guernsey in the Channel Islands. But we have done some initial testing outside of the islands in the UK, in India. So one of our attractive markets, we believe, is potentially India for a number of reasons. Not just because of its size in terms of market, but yeah, this is again a question that we would love your students to have a look at. what markets do you think we should approach in the first instance, and why? Yeah.
So does the product require your physical presence on the site, or can it be done all electronically?
It's all electronic. It doesn't require anyone's physical presence at all. It's completely automated. Yeah.
So essentially, national borders, geography, it's not a hindrance. You can expand. I assume it's primarily in English, probably, right, at this time, or is it possible to, is the language still some sort of, I guess the business world operates in English, so it shouldn't be a problem, but still, is it a consideration?
It's a consideration for sure. I think there are semantics which can be adjusted within the scientific methodology that we've kind of allowed. So there's a bandwidth to be able to adjust the statements to meet the needs of certain jurisdictions and cultures. But generally speaking, if you're talking about organizational culture, the quality of decisions and how you put those decisions into action, really the semantics don't really matter. How well are you doing it?
Do you think, I'm just curious again, here I'm speaking from my background, do you think there may be some national or cultural differences? I mean, is it possible that some things that work, for example, in the UK may not work, I don't know, in Japan? Or I imagine that sort of Europe, Canada, the United States, Australia, it seems to me the business world is pretty unified. And even though there are local differences, obviously cultural, institutional, but it still seems like it's more or less the same business culture by and large. I mean, yes, maybe France or Germany a little different, but so, but still, going globally, is it possible that there may be some national, cultural, institutional, legal, what other differences, I'm not sure, that might sort of need an adjustment of the model?
I don't know. It's a very good question. I don't know whether anyone knows the answer to that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something we will find out along the way. I would answer it in the way that the model is designed, the things that we're actually measuring, means that what we will probably see is that there will be different interconnections that exist and different factorials that exist between those connections. Remember, I was talking about that at the beginning. You might see different factorials that exist within Japan than compared to those that exist within Canada, I would imagine. And again, I would see that as being cultural, in terms of the way businesses operate and the way that businesses are perceived to be, functioning well and not well. Those will vary across jurisdictions. And I think the beauty of what we've created is that it is capable of picking up those nuances, measuring them, and then we can begin to understand, well, actually, if you're operating a business in Japan, you actually need to do it slightly differently to the way that you operate a business in Canada. And we can actually tell you how and why.
Yeah. That's a very good point. And yeah, maybe through some additional testing, maybe there will be some sort of adjustments that, There is a question from Jigisha about the cost of the service. And if I may expand it from just the cost, the price structure, is it a fixed fee? Is it per employee? Is it subscription? How do you charge for your services?
Yeah, so we operate a subscription and kind of license model. So essentially an organization would pay for their license, and then they would subscribe their employees, basically. Now,
so is it a continuous service, or is it like a one-time done and forget, or is it something that may be done continuously then?
No, it's a continuous service. So we'll do an initial assessment. So there'll be an initial kind of benchmarking of the data from the 36-point survey. And then we have other versions of the survey, which essentially drip into the organization over time. So because we understand how each of these things are interconnected, we can actually drip feed the most important statements in on a regular basis. And because we can drip those in, we can actually use those in order to predict the outcomes of others, because we know how these things are interconnected. So we don't need to run the 36-point survey, every month. We can actually run it once, probably run it towards the end of a cycle, maybe the end of a 12 or 9-month period. And then in between time, we can drip statements in. And we can still track. So a management team can look back at the last week and say, okay, what was our governance? What was our murmuration like last week? So we think we've hopefully kind of cracked the survey fatigue issue, where
Which is
obviously,
always a challenge. And again, students, believe me, nobody likes, or people like surveys for the first 10 minutes, but then if it's too much, too long, too frequent, people start sort of ignoring them, or so, and then yes, that's always a
yeah,
challenge. Yeah.
absolutely.
So in terms of promoting your services, advertisement, essentially, what do you do now to promote your services? What kind of channels do you use? And there was a question also about the message. So how do you position yourself? What do you say in your ads to attract the attention of potential customers?
Yeah, I would say we're too early to tell you how we do our marketing, and I think that's one of the reasons that we've got that question out there in our paper, in our document that we've submitted. You know, as a startup, we're really interested to understand, given the product that we have, given the size of the potential market that we have, given the fact that it is innovative, that it is a database solution and a tech solution, as opposed to a traditional management consultancy kind of, you know, people on the ground. You know, understanding how we should market this is a question that we would love to have answers for. So I honestly don't know the answer. What I do know is our initial strategy at the moment is to move into London. It's our closest stock exchange market. It has a huge amount of pressure placed on it. We have strong connections with the UK regulators there. So the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, the FRC, the Financial Reporting Council, they obviously write the UK Corporate Governance Code, and then the QCA, which is essentially the Quoted Companies Alliance. So these regulators, governance is a very significant issue. And traditionally, as I say, it's been measured in a very, what we would consider archaic kind of fashion. They're very interested in what we're doing. In fact, we've got meetings with the FRC in the next month to show them what we're doing. So our initial sort of tentative steps are into the London market. Our view is if we can create some traction within the London market, then we can fairly quickly hop into other quoted company marketplaces like New York, and hopefully, you know, go wider than that. But we don't see, sorry, I need to say this, although we're targeting quoted companies and stock exchange markets, the reality is that this is something that we think and we want to be cheap enough for any organization in the world. If you're 10 people and you operate as a small little marketing company in Indonesia, you know, why can't you use this? Well, we believe that you should be able to, and therefore the way that we're trying to cost price this is so that any organization in the world can use this. And of course, for our services, you know, for our benefit, it's the data that we're most interested in. So yeah.
Yeah, there is another question from Kushi about the sort of validity of the data or challenges with the surveys. And so the question is, you know, honesty of the self-reported data. But if I may, my question is a little bit bigger, so includes the sort of the data collection. But so what are the challenges in general that you see when you work with the companies? And maybe I'll even be more specific. So from my experience, as you mentioned, often companies seem to hire consultants or request these reports more for either compliance purposes or just to signal to their employees that we do something. But I hear that often it's almost impossible to convince the company to maybe do proper utility analysis of the program delivered. Often the companies seem to be happy simply asking the employees, so did you have fun during this training, for example? But not so much, did the retention improve? Did the performance improve? Did the conflicts go down? What was the return on investment? Again, you mentioned companies spent $250,000 of pounds on whatever the program is, but hardly ever do they allow the consultants to actually calculate. So how did it change the bottom line within a year or 2 years? Was the return on investment? So what are the in general challenges or obstacles, as the student put it, to your work to deliver the product in the best possible way, from data collection to perhaps bigger picture?
Yeah, I think our initial challenge is the fact that there is currently a cultural view, certainly within Western European markets, that governance is purely about compliance with codes. And if they can write a lovely, pretty well-articulated compliance statement to go in their annual reports, they've done their job with regards to corporate governance. And I think where we're coming from is a bit of an educational journey for some boards, not for all, but for some boards. And that is, of course, we're approaching it and saying, actually, governance is the precursor to compliance. It isn't compliance. Governance is also the precursor to sustainable long-term growth. So therefore, what you need to get right is your governance, not your compliance. And I think this is some of the educational journey that we see. I'll be honest, as soon as we get to sit in front of a board and we explain this, the lights go on and everything kind of falls into place. And as soon as you start saying to them that actually, we will support you with your compliance, but we'll actually reduce the amount that you spend on it, they begin to get very happy. Because at the moment, compliance spend is rising, 5%, 10%, almost year on year, because of obviously organizations are having to mitigate the risk of non-compliance with regulatory requirements. So I think we're pushing at a slightly open door, but I do think there's an educational journey in order to educate the idea that governance is the precursor to compliance. It isn't compliance. And I think that's really where we're kind of at in terms of, what's the biggest challenge. The other thing about the survey, I think there was hidden in there was this, the validity of the survey instrument. So this is something that we were really keen to demonstrate as soon as possible. So this is the independent piece of work that was carried out by an AI tech business called Dori Financial Modeling. And essentially what they've done is they've taken the initial data that we've had from all of our beta testing, and essentially they have validated the survey. Now they do this for hundreds of surveys all over the world in the investment business. And actually what they've said to us is that the validity of what we have is in the region of 80%, which is exceptionally high for a survey. They normally see it somewhere between 20 and 40% on the investment surveys that they do. So we're really, really proud of the fact that, we really believe we've designed a scientific survey instrument that truly measures what we're saying we're measuring. And internally, it's also very strongly validated and correlated. Yeah. So I think that as a question that does come back from a board, what are you not just asking my staff a few questions? I can do that. Of course, we're able to demonstrate the validity and the accuracy of what we're actually measuring.
And this is a big deal again for the students. Those of you who don't know, when it comes to data collection through surveys, there are all kinds of threats to validity. You already mentioned this, people providing honest answers, but in many cases, it's not about honesty per se. It's also about the capability to correctly evaluate what's going on. So people may be trying and, being genuine and honest, but simply cannot have either, a proper assessment done due to limited knowledge or maybe, limited, perhaps, view, so to speak. But also there may be socially desirable responses. Maybe, people say things that sound good, that make them look good or make their company look good. So it's quite admirable that you actually conducted independent assessment of the validity of the data, because most companies don't. Most companies, they just, assume that what they get is all correct. And you're right. I mean, most of the time it's, 80% sounds quite impressive, because most of the time, yes, there are all kinds of, biases, all kinds of things that, sway those responses. And yes, you're lucky if half of those responses actually represent the actual accurate picture. Yeah. Anyway, so we're almost out of time, but I wanted to spend a couple more minutes just going through the challenge itself and just making sure that we have a clear picture as to what needs to be done. So the first section, I see we have questions about the industry and competition analysis, and then selecting the new market. And so this is pretty clear. One question I have is, do you think it would be a good idea for the students to perhaps conduct their own sort of market survey, maybe talk to a couple of friends who own businesses and see what they do on the compliance, on governance sides? Are they using any consultants? If so, how did they select them? I mean, I assume they wouldn't know about your company, but perhaps maybe presenting the company, briefly, and then asking the respondent if they would be considering using a company like that. Would they hire, for example, the company specifically here at CoSteer? If so, why or why not? How much are they willing to pay? So would such a survey of a few friends be advisable here, or it's not necessary?
No, I think that would be really useful. I think from our perspective, we and it may not be that helpful, but we're trying to keep it as open and as wide as possible. We do really believe that what we have is unique, but how long things are unique in this world is often unknown. And I think what we would like to understand is, are there blockers out there that we hadn't realized? Are there elements within what we've created that doesn't necessarily immediately meet the needs of an organization? We've had some very, very candid and honest feedback from essentially the beta testers, the organizations that went through the beta testing. But I think absolutely go out there and ask, friends, those that work within organizations, family, friends, connections, go out there and ask some, simple set of 5 questions. What do you do currently? Here's an example of a different alternative. What do you think? Is it something you'd use? If you wouldn't, why wouldn't you? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So another section deals with marketing promotion. And again, this one is very, clear question task. So the students would be expected to come up with some suggestions and ideas for how to promote a service like this. I'm not sure if you have any special comments or directions for the students as they're working and trying to develop the essential marketing strategy, choosing the proper promotion channels, message, maybe even designing some mock-ups of the promotion materials, either ads that could be placed on social media, or maybe newsletter information that can be sent out through some mailing list and things like that. So any special requests with this respect?
I think we have an idea, but I guess it would be useful just to sort of push out what we think that is. So we don't necessarily see that our climb to the top of the tree in terms of measuring governance around the world is going to be direct to clients. We think there's probably going to be a more accelerated route through business advisory firms who adopt this technology as a kind of, it's a part of the pack that they use. They walk into an organization, we can measure your governance. Yes, we can send in, our kind of, top people, and they can sit in you for 2 weeks, or actually we can just send you a survey and we can give you these data. So we think that it could be part of a tool set that could be used with business advisory firms around the world. We also know that this is something that would be incredibly useful within the kind of IPO, so the initial public offering of companies, mergers, acquisitions. You've got 2 businesses. How quickly can we merge these 2 businesses together? Well, if we can measure the data for both of them, then we can probably accelerate that transition. So we think there are many possible avenues, but we don't know which one, and we're really interested to hear the thoughts of your students around the world.
So just to clarify then, who would be the target of the promotion effort? So you're saying, and it seems to me that it would be not only the end user, but potentially could be other consulting firms that maybe would be willing to either pay some sort of a license fee to you or have other agreement of collaboration. So essentially the advertisement could be directed to both the companies that would be consuming the product, but also maybe some intermediaries who are in that consulting space. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The way the technology is designed is it means that essentially you can have a single license, but multiple organizations under that license. So the way that we see that is essentially business advisory firms, management consultancies, etc. They can have a portfolio of businesses, 50, 60, 100 businesses that they work with. And they can essentially view all of those organizations under our technology, under the software that we've created. So the way we see it is that we could go business to customer, we can go B2C, but maybe we should go in B2B in terms of to, you know, other management advisory firms who have clients of their own. So yeah, we'd be really interested to hear your students' thoughts on both of those strategies and which one they think might be the best.
Yeah, that's a good, yeah. And then obviously, price and distribution entry modes. So for the entry mode, if students are suggesting some form of a collaboration, joint venture perhaps, or an alliance, or maybe some other form of through a distributor, it would be, I assume, advisable to provide also not only suggest that mode, but also provide some names and preferably contacts of the potential distributors, partners, licensees, or so on, right?
Yes.
And then regulations, certification, pricing. So these are pretty straightforward questions. For the pricing, again, I would then remind to the students that based on the conversation we had today, so it's a continuous product. So I assume it could be maybe term specific, but it could be something that the company may be using on a longitudinal basis. And so that might affect the price. So it could be a specific fixed price, I assume, but it could also be a form of subscription or some maybe other form of payment. Is that correct? So it doesn't have to be just a fixed price tag as, you know, like bottle of water, £1. So it would be something more complicated.
Yeah, and we're trying to keep it as simple as possible. But yes, I think you're right. I think some companies will want to kind of, well, you know, we just want to do this, and then we'll see what we do with it after that. There needs to be a price point for that. But ultimately, what we want to sell is a long-term subscription.
Yeah.
And of course, the more data we have, the more organizations we have, the more detailed the insights we can provide to our clients.
Yeah.
So obviously, one of the outcomes from this is not just the data, it's of course the ability to benchmark against your industry competitors.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that we're obviously beginning to create and be able to market and sell to. Yeah.
That makes perfect sense. All right, well, it seems like we've gone through all of the points. I don't have any further questions. It seems like we answered all the questions from the students. There is one technical issue, and so just for the students, so the teams were formed, as you know. You submitted the first weekly progress survey that was due yesterday. So another survey will be coming out probably today. And so as always, it will be due next Sunday. So want to know how your teams are doing. So, but you'll be getting separate information about that, so no worries. Well, thank you so much for sharing the information about your company. So it will be a few quiet weeks when the students will be working on the project. There may be occasional questions, and then maybe we'll try to do another webinar sometime, perhaps in October. Maybe by that time, the students, I assume, will have more specific questions. So maybe we'll do another one, mainly with the goal of hearing what the students have to say at that time, or ask, and then providing either feedback or maybe additional information. And then all of the reports will be done sometime by the end of November, early December, when we'll have the full compilation of all of the reports. So that's when, and it may again get a little busier before the final deadline, as the students will be kind of probably working more intensively at that time. So we may be coming back with more questions and requests for more information. Well, thank you so much. Truly appreciate your time and the information. So very informative, and we'll be in touch as the project progresses.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.